Three, two, one, and we are not live. Hey everybody, it's Felix, reporting from his house. I was gonna say my address, but I realized that was probably not in my best interest. So, unless you know what, I'm not even gonna bother saying unless you've been living under a rock, you know about the coronavirus, because even then you'd probably still hear about it. But as I'm sure you're painfully aware, we're all stuck at our homes right now, and we're feeling lonely. And so today I wanted to take some time to talk about the effects of proper, true isolation and how that compares and contrasts to what we're experiencing right now, which is still a form of isolation. And I learned some pretty interesting things when researching this, and, I think that it would be cool to share. Isolation is pretty much just being cut off from things. And there's extreme isolation, and there's just isolation, which is what we're going through right now. And I definitely feel for the people that are stuck alone. I've got my family, obviously, and so that's definitely a good buffer for mental illness, I think. I mean, it could also cause problems. But the main thing, I don't want to talk about just myself, but the main thing that I've been feeling is that I don't want to see other people. Whereas originally I was like totally jonesing for it. I was super desperate. I was like, oh my God, I gotta get out there. I gotta go talk to people. I've lost that completely. When I go on a dog walk now, if I see people, I immediately go to the other side of the road. And it's not just because I'm scared about getting infected. I do not want to interact with them at all. I don't know what that says about me, but I think it's a sentiment that many people have shared. That I'm kind of, I think I hit some breaking point, if you will. And I've lost pretty much any desire to talk to people, which is useful, I suppose. But this is not, it's not how everybody reacts. Lots of people I've talked to have. I know that my parents have felt about the same way, but tons of kids my age online have been freaking out, being like, oh my God, I need to talk to somebody, and they haven't really hit any sort of breaking point like I did. But like I was saying earlier, like we're not really experiencing true isolation, but there have been some cases of people that have. And probably the most common one is just solitary confinement, which I'd never realized how scared of that I was until researching this. But your average solitary confinement room is pretty hellish. It's a little dingy, dark room that's no bigger than probably like 2 bathroom stalls put together. It's really small. And it's got a bed, a toilet, and uncomfortable light at the top. That's the only way I can think to describe it, because it's not bright enough that it's really illuminating the room. It's just bright enough that it would totally keep you up while you're trying to sleep. And the main thing that people seem to report after spending time in isolation in a solitary confinement cell is that you totally disassociate and lose track of time. And that the time is the one that I want to cue in on in a second. But many of the inmates would just say that they would just sit there just like thinking about their breathing for hours on end, and you have no idea what time it is because there's no sunlight coming in. There's just the one little hole in the door where they stick food through, and occasionally they let you out to go shower or whatnot. And so your only baseline for what time of day it is when people are coming in, and even then it's easy to lose track of what time they're even coming in at. And so this actually seems to be a phenomenon that people that I know, myself and my family included, are experiencing during this social distancing. Just that, like, I've been waking up at weird times, and it's because your I think it's circadian rhythm is messed up, which is pretty much what gets you waking up with the sun and going to sleep, once it gets dark, which obviously, because of technology and whatnot, we tend not to do properly, at least the sleeping part. But I've definitely been waking up way later than I ever have, and generally I have control over it, where I wake up pretty early and then I'll choose to go back to sleep. But as of late, it's been more that I'll just wake up at like 9:30 or something, completely against my will. I don't want to wake up at that time. It kind of freaks me out, because then I'm like, whoa, I just lost out on a chunk of my day. And I realize that sounds super obnoxious because most people are waking up at like 12, but I've always been a pretty early bird, and so it's been really messing with me. But I'm not the only one experiencing that. I find that throughout the entire day, everybody seems to be like, whoa, what? It's 5 o'clock. How'd that happen? And time seems to be almost speeding up. But again, also going really slow sometimes. And that's what brings me to, I want to talk about, many of you probably know the YouTuber Vsauce, the guy who goes Vsauce, Michael here. And he had a whole video about isolation that was really interesting and actually helpful for this project, because he actually locked himself in a stark white room with a light and no features, with enough food to last him 3 days for 72 hours, 3 days. 3 days, even though it doesn't sound like a lot, but with no stimulation whatsoever, he started to feel all kinds of crazy effects. And I think it's interesting to look at those and look at how we've been feeling with the social distancing, because there's a surprising amount of crossover. So one of the main things that he seemed to talk about was his dreams, where he would dream that he was still in the room. And so it became hard to actually distinguish dreams from reality. Now, I often forget my dreams as soon as I wake up, which, not to be a nerd, but you do dream every night, whether you believe it or not. It's just sometimes you'll forget it instantaneously. His dreams would start to meld in with reality, because if he's just in the room for his dreams and his waking hours, how are you even supposed to tell that apart? Really, the only difference is you close your eyes and open them, and then you're just in the same place. So yeah, pretty disconcerting. Now, obviously, I've been talking about isolation with humans this whole time, but one of the most overshadowed part of the experiment is the pit of despair. And yes, this is what Harlow himself called it. And so I'd love to talk about that. Love is the wrong word, but I'd like to talk about that. Lots of people have always thought that the only reason children have any sort of bond with their parents is just because they know they're the ones that feed them and give them shelter and whatnot. And then it's not about being comforted or any of that. It's, strictly scientific. It's just about, I get food from X, and so X is my parent. Y does not give me food, so Y is not my parent. But Harlow didn't think that was the case, and his study ended up showing that he was correct in this idea. So the main draw of his experiments was that he was trying to prove that motherly touch and being comforted matters more to a baby than being fed. So they would set up a cloth mother and a wire mother, which were two dummy monkey stand-ins, and the cloth mother would be wrapped in a soft cloth blanket, and the wire mother would be a cold, hard wire monkey thing with a baby bottle sticking out of it. And pretty much across the board, monkeys they'd put in the cage with the two parents would immediately go and start clinging to the cloth mother and ignore the wire mother unless they got hungry, where they would usually even stay on the cloth mother and just lean over to take a few sips from the baby bottle and then immediately go back to clinging to the cloth mother. So even in what is a pretty simple and elegant experiment, he's already proved all he needs to, that babies really do value human touch. And this is something we've known for a while, but I definitely think Harlow helped illuminate it. There's a whole phenomenon about, it tends to happen in Russia a lot, where there will be nurseries full of babies and not nearly enough people to care for them. And they're put up for adoption, and it can cause some serious psychological issues that might not even come to a head until later, when they're just living in this cacophonous, endless screaming from all the other babies that aren't experiencing human touch, that have just been put in cradles. But what's disturbing is that Harlow, that was not enough for him to walk away with. So he created what he dubbed, as I said earlier, the pit of despair. And it looks like a saw trap. It's a inverted pyramid that he would stick these baby monkeys in from birth. He'd feed them and whatnot, and they couldn't climb out of it. They were just stuck in one place for the most part. And they wouldn't just straight up die. They would, be able to get exercise by trying to move out of it, and eventually they'd give up. And so then he would release them. This is after, he would keep them in this for like a year. It's really messed up. And there's terrible videos where he releases them among their fellow monkey peers that have had a proper upbringing, and they don't know what to do. They just clutch their face and body and just run away from everything into a corner. They don't want to socialize. They don't want to explore. They just want to be held. And it's really sad to watch, because they just clutch onto themselves because there's nothing else for them to hold. And the other monkeys will come up and try to socialize with them, and they don't want anything to do with it. And I found that to be really interesting, because it's not unlike an uber extreme version of the aversion to social contact that myself and others have been feeling. It's just that obviously the conditions were far more dire. For us, we're just trapped inside our home, and we still got things to do and whatnot, and we've got our families to talk to. But for these monkeys, they were completely alone, other than when a human that they don't know how to interface with, would come and feed them. And so it caused them to, A, not know how to socialize, but B, have no innate desire to, because they've never done it before. What would be the point? They're not going to gain anything from it. And so I just thought that was interesting, because I do actually think there's some crossover that between us and the Pit of Despair monkeys right now. Which, again, I'm not trying to suggest that we're stuck in an upside-down pyramid of sadness and depression, but I do think that there's definitely some science to back up that we stop wanting to interact with others. So for this next segment, for some reason I couldn't convince my parents to just do a quick interview with me. So I instead hopped on Discord and tried to covertly get some answers from some of my friends. So take a listen. So I'm here with Jason Marlin, otherwise known as my father, and so basically, how is the quarantine / social distancing going for you so far?
Well, I think that we are some of the lucky people, because I've been working at home on and off for the past 20 years, really. Out of the past, 2 decades, I've probably gone into the office for 6 years, and I've been working at home for the last 9. So it hasn't been a huge change for me, but I recognize how significant it's been for the rest of the family, especially you and Nova, not getting to see your friends, and kind of having to figure out new ways to interact with school and get work done. In a lot of ways, it's kind of like watching you adapt to a job, watching Noah get into Zoom calls and watching you guys do video conferencing and stuff. It's a lot like watching somebody do some, white collar office job.
Curve to it, But one thing I was wondering, it seems that an effect that a lot of people are feeling, I imagine you're probably not because you're hyper aware of the time, but lots of people are hard time keeping track of like what time of day it is. Have you experienced that at all?
I mean, absolutely. In terms of the people that, so I work for a news publication, and we publish news, and we watch traffic, and we watch traffic patterns, like how, we publish stories at a certain time of day. Say 9 a.m. Central Time or Eastern Time is pretty common for there to be, several stories published, so that people who are just coming onto the job can start reading, and you optimize your publishing schedule around the work schedule of your average person, which is 8, 9, 10 a.m. in the morning. And lately, it has been, for the past month or so, obvious, since quarantine especially, that time has shifted massively forward on the eastern side. Yeah. So that what used to be 8 or 9 is more like 11 or 12 noon. And that's been kind of interesting to watch. Again, with my colleagues, nothing much has changed, but we're still kind of doing the same thing we've always done. But it's been interesting to watch the news consumer change their patterns like that.
Yeah, that's actually not something I thought about, but for you guys it really is important as to when people are getting up and going to bed, and I think pretty unanimously it's shifted forward for everyone. I know for a fact, obviously I've been staying up later and whatnot and waking up later than I usually do, and I actually noticed that it's gotten out of my control at this point.
Sure, it makes you wonder, if we didn't have the pressures of society and the pressures of work, and again, this is obviously there's a huge number of people that are working so-called frontline jobs who are having to still continue their same patterns. But for a lot of people that are seeing this, that are having to work from home for the first time, I do wonder if we're kind of like falling into our natural human rhythm of sleeping for a certain number of time and finally kind of removing the burden of, again, it's very privileged to say, but removing the burden of societal day in, day out kind of rigmarole and living as we naturally would. It's interesting.
Yeah. But I do think it's interesting seeing how that's an effect of extreme isolation is loss of time. And that's, I'm talking about like no stimuli for 3 days. And it seems that we're experiencing it after it's been a while, but it's been far less extreme than no stimuli, And I think the most interesting thing I've definitely felt as if, like even right there, I couldn't name how long we've been doing this, but it does not feel super long. It hasn't felt. I can't remember the beginning.
Yeah,
And
well, for me, the first time this morning when I was in bed, I have not felt panicked, I should say, in any of this, because like I said, it's very much par for the course for my normal schedule. It feels like with you guys at home, it feels a bit like summer vacation, right? Except we're not going on vacation.
Yeah.
So it feels a lot like that for me. But for the first time this morning, I kind of had a mini panic attack when I woke up, and I thought, wow, we've like completely shifted to this new way of being, where we're at home and and we really haven't. And I'm not saying that we should. I mean, clearly, I do think the science is there, and it is quite clear that you can reduce the burden on our medical services if you can keep at home or whatever. But it's shocking the speed with which we adapted to that and kind of accepted it and moved on with our lives.
Gives me some faith that we could handle like a worldwide affecting thing.
For sure.
Tragic. I mean, this is that. But like, if there were like an asteroid and we all needed to do some task to make it go away,
or something as extreme as global warming, right?
Yeah.
So
exactly.
like I saw something.
The problem with that is it's not an immediate threat that we're seeing day to day.
Right. Yeah, I saw a meme that was like, "This is Mother Nature practicing for
getting people to
you can deal with this."
And
the other interesting thing that I've noticed, is just polar extreme. On the one hand, I saw this tweet kind of juxtaposing these two sentiments. One from this mom who was like at home and she was just lamenting like, oh, I don't know the difference between when I'm drinking my coffee and when I'm having my first glass of wine, which is funny, we can relate to that. But then you had the other extreme end of that is like you had somebody that's working in emergency rooms and nurse who's like, my daily routine is now comforting people as they die because there's a certain number of people are getting coronavirus and that number's going to double in the next few weeks at least, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just really interesting that those of us who are and I count myself as lucky. We're lucky.
Yeah.
We're able to kind of take a break, a breather, and say like, oh man, maybe this is an opportunity for us to reevaluate what's important.
Yeah.
As a society.
And they're trying
these
to.
These are the people that we've shamed for years. And say like, oh, they're taking welfare because they're not doing important work. But it turns out that
it's the most important.
They're doing the most important.
I mean, I think we've always known that. I mean, I can't say that my day-to-day life is impacted by some, Wall Street dude that's sitting around smoking cigars, but I can definitely say that I appreciate, everybody that works in sanitation and, again, the healthcare system, etc. Yeah, exactly. The things that we don't even think about.
Right now,
yeah.
Basic infrastructure crumble, and it could happen. Yeah. If these people, if enough people get sick, and if we fall apart fast enough, that kind of stuff could happen. It's kind of a shocking acknowledgement of how fragile our society really is. But nobody ever asks these questions about like, well, can your local bank survive 3 months without income? Nobody asks that. Why as individuals expected to survive this amount of time without income? And we're at the mercy of the economic system. The very foundations of the economy are not asked to do that same thing.
I was surprised what I guess that's all the time we got for now. But thank you so much.
Sorry, I blathered on as usual.
So, that was my father, and that was me talking for a long time. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you learned some new things about how you can relate science to your own experiences. And I think I did a good job at keeping it light and whatnot. So, as far as what I used to study for this, research for this, one of the biggest things I used actually was Vsauce's Mindfield video on isolation. And then I talked about Harlow's monkey experiments a lot, specifically SciShow, Psych, and Crash Courses videos on them. For my background music, I used stock free-to-play music that doesn't require a citation, luckily, and a song from Asheville High School's very own David Pollock, or DLP space 123 on SoundCloud, who actually had a little quote for us that I'm going to include at the end. Anyways, thanks again for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful social distancing. Goodbye. And for those of you still listening, this is from David Pollock himself, the creator of one of the songs I used, titled David Beat Number 3. You know that song Heroin by the Velvet Underground? That's how I feel. David Slobotron Pollock when asked about his thoughts on social distancing.